Today's daf is daf tes vav, and we'll begin on line 4. Amar Rava, Hani tzrare de pshite. We're discussing now the scope and the application of the Isur of Levishas Bigdei Kilayim, and the Isur of Lo Silbash applies whenever you enjoy the benefit of the warmth that the cloth gives you, and the cloth is made of a combination of wool and flax. But tzrari de pshite, says Rava, ein bohem mishum kilayim. What they used to do was they used to have like money bags, and they placed the tzroros, the mows, inside a cloth, and they would very often wear that cloth around their chest. And Rava says that there's no chimum. The cloth that's holding on to these mows will not warm up his body, because the mows inside the cloth make the cloth, the beged, into a very hard, tough beged, and it doesn't absorb the warmth. However, the bizrane, they had another kind of a bag that was made of a cloth, and it was used to store zroim, seeds. Yesh b'hem mishum kilayim. If he wears this beged that has kilayim around his chest, then it will warm up his body. The fact that there are seeds inside the beged will not in any way detract from the ability of the beged to warm up his body. But Rav Ashi Omar, he holds echad zeh v'echad zeh ein bo mishum kilayim. Neither in the case of a tzrari de pshite, nor in the case of tzrari de bizne, would there be a violation of the Isur kilayim. And the question is, why not? After all, in the case of bizne bizrane at least, it warms up your body, so you're having a benefit from that levisha of kilayim. And the answer is levisha ein derech chimum bekach. That is a precondition for the violation of the Isur levisha shatnes, that it's got to be a beged that's derech lischame b'hem. This is the way that you warm up. You use the beged to warm up your body. This beged has been designated for the purpose of carrying zroim, and therefore it's not a beged of derech chimum, and it's mutter. The Mishnah said avalo. The Mishnah, as you remember, on the previous Amud, was addressing the question of sending gifts to your friend on Yontif. And the Mishnah prohibited something called a sandal misumar. Now, a sandal misumar is a little bit similar to what you'd find in contemporary life on a sports field. Like, for example, baseball players will wear something that's misumar. And it means it's a wooden kind of a shoe that is covered by leather, but they put nails inside. And that makes it a very dangerous kind of a shoe. And the Gemara is going to now explain why we don't send such a thing as a gift on Yontif. Sandal ha-mesubra my taima, lo. Why is it that we do not send such a sandal as a gift to a friend on Yontif? And the Gemara answers, mishum Masechet shahaya. Now, Masechet shahaya means a story that took place in Jewish history. The Gemara elsewhere in Masechet Shabbos on Daf Pei gives us a little bit of the background of the history and the tragic catastrophe that took place with a sandal misumar. And basically what happened was that the Jews were hiding in a cave because the Romans were now persecuting the Jews. And the Jews were not able to live a religious life, and they hid themselves up in a cave. And in order to make sure that the Romans would not be able to find the tracks, the footsteps, and then figure out where the Jews were hiding, they would not let anyone come into the cave, because a person who's walking towards the cave, his footprints would be directed towards the cave, and then the enemies would be able to track it down. you were allowed to leave the cave because then your footprints would be in that direction. But on one particular occasion, somebody entered into the cave illegally. And when the people inside the cave saw that outside the cave there were footprints, they went berserk. They literally lost their marbles, so to speak, because they were absolutely overwhelmed by fright that now the enemies were going to find them. And as a result, pandemonium broke out, and they started, without thinking, they started kicking each other, and many people died. They had those nails on the bottom of the sandalim. Now, that occasion was on a Shabbos. Now, Shabbos, as you know, is not a day to be depressed. And the fear of the Chachamim was that if we would wear these kind of shoes on Shabbos, then people would remind themselves of that terrible catastrophe in which many Jews lost their lives. So they prohibited wearing these kinds of sandalim, misumarim, on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. And therefore, this is not a proper gift to send to a friend on Yom Tov. Amar Abaye, sandal ha-mesubar osur linolo, but mutar litaltalo. Abaye is going to derive from our Mishnah, by implication, by inference, a conclusion as far as the status of sandal mesumar on Shabbos or Yom Tov regarding muktzah. Because our Mishnah says you're not allowed to send it as a gift on Yom Tov. Why did the Mishnah have to bother telling me you can't send it? It's muktzah. It has no function. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to wear a sandal ha-mesumar. That was Xeris Chachamim. And if that be the case, then you don't even have to tell me that you can't send it because you're not allowed to even lift it up. It's an Isa Diltal. So therefore, Abaye derives the conclusion that mutal italtalo, and there is no Isa mukta. Also, linalo, you're not allowed to wear it mishum ma'aseh shahaya, because of that catastrophe. We don't want to be reminded of that terrible catastrophe. But mutal italtalo means that there's no Isur mukta. Midaktani, since it says in the Mishnah Mishalchim, it says you're not allowed to send it as a gift on Yom Tov. Isal kedaitach also italtalo, if you would think that it's mukta, then hashta little tule asur. If it's also even to lift it up, then mishalchim miboy, you have to tell me that you can't send it. How would you possibly send it as a gift unless you lifted it up? But apparently you're allowed to lift it up, but it's not mukta. You're not allowed to send it. So the question is, why isn't it mukta? After all, it has no function. So the answer is that it's a kli. Anything that's a utensil, you could always find some use for it. So therefore, it's not muktzah. On the other hand, you can't wear it on Yom Tov, so then it should be what's called a kli shemalachto le'isa. Any kli, a vessel, which is not muktzah, but it's designated for a certain use, and that use is prohibited on Shabbos or Yom Tov, that's called a kli shemalachto le'isa. However, as opposed to mukta, klisha malachta lisa, you're allowed to be metaltalit litzorech gufo litzorech makomo, and this is considered litzorech gufo, meaning if you want to send it as a gift, that's called litzorech gufo. So therefore, there's no isur tilta. So there's no mukta because it's a kli. And as far as the isur of klisha malachta lisa is concerned, that's mutal litzorech gufo. And sending a gift would be l'tar kufo. However, you're not allowed to send this as a gift because you would be sort of being machshel him that maybe he would think, oh, if he sent me this gift, I have to wear it on Yom Tov. And then he'd be in violation of the gzera of sandal ha-mesumar. The Mishnah continues and says, "V'lo, you cannot send to your friend on Yom Tov minol she'eno tofu." In other words, you have the leather, but it's not sewn up yet. The shoemaker has not done yet what he has to do to manufacture a full, complete shoe. So the Gemara says, Pshita. certainly if it has no function, you can't wear it as a shoe, then why would we allow you to send it as a gift on Yontif? We allow you to send gifts as a Yontif because the recipient receives something that he can use in the state that he finds it. Again, he has the raw materials, but on Yontif, you're not going to be allowed to be tofer to create a shoe. Lo nitzrecha the af al gav the nokit besiche. Although it hasn't been fully sewn, there are pins. Siche are pins. So he pinned up the shoe in such a way that he could slip his foot into the shoe and he could wear it. And these little pins were made of wood. And if that be the case, the recipient could get some benefit and wear these shoes. However, the Mishnah tells me you're not allowed to send it as a gift on Yom Tov because lo nigmar malachto, it wasn't completed with tefirah. And even during the week, a person would not usually wear a shoe, which is, instead of being stitched together in a permanent way, is pinned together. The Mishnah tells us, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, aflo minol lavan. Now, a minol lavan means that the leather has not been dyed black. And since we don't usually wear a white shoe in the society of Rabbi Yehuda, and you would need a professional to dye it black, which we cannot do on Yontif, therefore you don't send such a gift on Yontif, the recipient is not going to enjoy the benefit, and even if it was weekday, he wouldn't be enjoying the benefit until it undergoes a final process of manufacturing of dyeing. When it becomes black, we don't wear white shoes. However, we're going to see soon that Rabbi Yossi will actually encourage white shoes and discourage black shoes. Tanya, we learned in a Beitza, Rabbi Yehuda matir b'shachar, you can send black shoes on Yontif, even if they're not totally brushed up. We'll explain. The oser b'lavan. However, in the case of white shoes, which have to be dyed, and you need a professional dyer in order to convert a white shoe into a black shoe, that's not something that you could do on Yontif. And mipnei she'ein derech linol b'minol lavan. We don't wear white shoes. V'tzarech, and in order to dye them, you need bitas hagir. You know, that's a professional dyer has something called bitas hagir. The word bitza means whenever you take a powder and you add water and it becomes like a doughy substance. And gear is a clump of dirt. They used to take a clump of dirt. This was an entire professional procedure. And they would add water to it. And then they would mix it together, knead it together, and create a substance which would be used as a dye to dye something white black. But again, you need a professional to do such a thing. We're not going to wear white shoes, and we're not going to be able to dye them black on Yontif. Therefore, you're not giving him a gift that he could benefit from on Yontif. Rabbi Yossi Omer, just the opposite. B'shachar, that, oh, I'm sorry, I missed the word oser. Rabbi Yossi, oser b'shachar. Just the opposite. Rabbi Yossi says, send a gift on Yontif of a white shoe that hasn't been dyed black. And apparently in Rabbi Yossi's Geged, they would wear white shoes, but it's also to send black shoes. Why? Because these black shoes have not been brushed up, have not been polished. Now, litzachzecho means a lot more than what we think it means. It's not just to brush it up. Like, for example, you have dust on your shoes, just get a cloth and brush it up. Litzachzecho, in this case, is called in the Hebrew translation, lehachliko. It means that the natural state of leather, meaning the hide, when it's removed from the animal, the carcass of the animal, it is full of cracks and crevices, and you have to be machlik it. What does it mean, lahachlik? Lahachlik means that you have to smoothen it out. There's an entire professional process of smoothing it out. That's called litzachzecho. Now the Gemara is going to try to make peace and harmony between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. It seems that they are polar opposites, whereas Rabbi Yehuda seems to be advocating black in favor of black shoes and prohibiting white shoes. Rabbi Yossi is the opposite. Lo pligi, no machlokas. Marki asrei umarki asrei. Each one is reflecting the minhag in his locale. And now the Gemara explains. Now, in order to appreciate the Gemara that we're about to learn, we have to understand that the hide of an animal, when it is skinned off the carcass of an animal, has two sides. There's the outer side and the underside. The underside is close to the basar. It's attached to the flesh. And the outer side is where you have like hairs and so forth and so on. As a general rule, the outer side of the hide is relatively smooth. Again, you may have to take off some of the hairs, but it's smooth. The inner side is full of these cracks and crevices. So the Gemara says the following. Asrei demar, there were two ways in which the shoemakers would make shoes. Which side of the leather was up? You know what I'm talking about? Like, let's say you were taking a piece of bread and putting peanut butter on it. So which side is up and which side is down? I don't know if you're familiar with that book by Dr. Seuss, Oliver Sholem. Anyway, so trying to give you a little room to joke around. The Asrei Demar, in Rabbi Yehuda's place, the way they manufactured shoes was Bisra L'Tachas. It means that the side of the hide, that the inside of the hide, which comes in contact with the basar and it's full of cracks, that was on the inside of the shoe. Whereas the side that you could see, that's obvious to the eye when you look at the shoe, is the top side of the leather, of the hide, and that's relatively smooth. And in such a case, you don't need tzichtzuk. Again, tzichtzuk means more than, as we said before, brushing off the dirt. It means really to go through a process of smoothing it. In Rabbi Yehuda's locale, they didn't have to bother with tzichtzuk because they made sure that the side that faced the outside of the shoe, which would be obvious to the naked eye, that side was relatively smooth because it was the outer side of the hide. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda allows you to send a black shoe, even without tzichtzuk, on Yontif, because you don't need tzichtzuk. It's not necessary, because the tzad hachitzoni, which is nir la'ayin, all you have to do is just put some black paint on it whatsoever, and it's very smooth. You don't have to go through a process of tziftzah. But B'asri Demar, in the area of Rabbi Yossi, Bisrali El, they put the hide on in the opposite direction. So the part of the hide that is close to the flesh of the animal, the inner side of the hide, was the outer side of the shoe, and therefore you need tziftzah. So by sending a white shoe, which means it's a white shoe, it's in its natural state, and it hasn't been subjected to tziftzah, that's not something you would send even during a weekday. The Mishnah says, "Klal kol sheni osim bo biyontif." You're allowed to send a gift as long as it's in a state of completion, which you would benefit, the recipient could benefit from and wear it as an ornament on Yontif. Rav Sheshes, Sharaluhu l'Rabbanan l'shturei tefillin b'yom ha'tava. Rav Sheshes allowed the Chachamim to send tefillin as a gift on Yontif. Amalei Abai turns to Rav Sheshes. Are you allowed to send tefillin as a gift on Yontif? Anything that you could wear as an ornament and beautify your body, those begadim you're allowed to send on Yontif. But on Yontif, we don't wear tefillin. Tefillin is called an os, and a day that's sanctified is not an os. The Gemara answers, Hachi Kamar. Rav Sheshes has a different take on the Mishnah. He did not understand the Mishnah the way Abai understood the Mishnah, but rather, Chol sheni osimbo b'chol mishalchen oso b'yontif. It's irrelevant as to whether or not he would wear and beautify himself with this beggar that he receives on Yontif. The question is, would he wear such an ornament on Erev Yontif, on Chol, on a weekday? And tefillin we wear on a weekday, and therefore it qualifies as a davar sheni osimbo, mi osimbo b'chol. And therefore it's a great gift when you give me something on Yontif that during the days of Chol, I'll be able to wear it. Now, one thing I don't understand here, and I have to be honest with you, is why is there no Isur Muktzah with regard to tefillin? I looked around, none of the Mefarshim seemed to raise this question. After all, tefillin we don't wear on Yontif. And if we don't wear it on Yontif, then it's Muktzah. How could he possibly send it as a gift? So the only idea I came up with, but I don't know if this is correct, is that tefillin is a kli, it's a beged, but it's a kli shemalachto le'isa. According to those poskim who say you're not allowed to wear tefillin on Yontif, which I'm pretty sure that's how we paskin. So it becomes a kli shemalachto le'isa, and to send a gift is called l'tzarach gufo, and therefore you'd be allowed to move the davar shemalachto le'isa. Amar Abai tefillin hol v'yasel liyadam nema be'milsa. You know, once you're mentioning tefillin in the context of Shabbos and Yontif, I'd like to add something that's not directly relevant to our subject, meaning we already decided that you're allowed to, Rav Sheshes, you're allowed to send a gift of tefillin on Yontif, but I have a different issue. And Abai addresses the following question. With regard to carrying tefillin on Yontif from a Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah or 4 amos in Rosh Hashanah, we would violate a malach of hotzah like we would if we carried any object. So what do we do in a case that we're out in the fields and it's Shabbos and we find a pair of tefillin and it's bizayat tefillin? I mean, somebody could steal it. It's not secure. Maybe the dogs will come and take it away. It's a very bad situation. How can I circumvent the Isur Hotzah for the benefit of protecting the tefillin? And the answer is that l'chora you could put them on and wear them. Why? Because you're not allowed to carry something from one rishus to the other. That's Hotzah derech masui. But if you're wearing it derech malbush, that's not called carrying. But Abai discusses a different kind of a situation. The man was already wearing his tefillin before Shabbos, and now, without realizing it, and he didn't take off his tefillin, and now it's already Shabbos. He's coming home for Shabbos, tefillin barosho. You see from this Gemara that even when you're on the derech, you wear tefillin. V'shaka alav hachama, and now it's Shabbos. The sun is set. Now, although we would allow on a doraisa level wearing tefillin, and it's not called carrying, but midrabanan, they prohibited it. And they required what's called shinu. So what does he do in such a case? Meiniach yado aleihem. He should cover the tefillin sharash with his hand, continue walking, ad shemagil Beitza, until he comes home. Once he gets home, then the tefillin are secure, and he can take them off. Alternatively, again, the same exact scenario, but Haya Yochev on Erev Shabbos, he's sitting in the base medrash, out in the fields, and it's a place which is exposed to dogs and thieves and whatnot. Tefillin barosha, and he's wearing his tefillin, which makes sense in the base medrash. But the kiddush olav hayom, it's already Shabbos. Once again, meiniach yado aleim, he covers the tefillin ad shemagil Beitza, and they're going to allow him to carry the tefillin by wearing them through a Rishus HaRabim or from Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid, because if they would force him to take off his tefillin, he would have to leave it out in a place that's not mishtamer, that's exposed and vulnerable to, as we said before, the thieves and the dogs, and that would be bizayon to the tefillin. So for the sake of avoiding bizayon of tefillin, the Chachamim permitted him to wear the tefillin until he gets home. Of course, again, I'm just re-emphasizing that which is obvious. Would he be allowed to take the tefillin off of his head in the base medrash or in the base on the derech and carry the tefillin? That for sure would be prohibited, because then he would be violating Hotzah D'Oraisa, and that we can't do even for the sake of preventing bizayon tefillin. What we're going to allow is a drabanan in which he's carrying the tefillin by wearing them. Now, let's add another point. Why is he covering the tefillin with his hand? And that's called maris ha'ayin, meaning we're afraid that the spectator thinks that he's carrying his tefillin, although he's wearing them, but that's also asur midrabanan on kol panim. So in order to make sure that the spectator doesn't see that he's wearing his tefillin, going from one rishus to the other on Shabbos, he has to cover the tefillin with his hand. And here the Mefarshim go to town, because l'chora, we've established that maris ha'ayin is also even b'chadrei chadarit. Even if no one will see you, there's still an isur maris ha'ayin. And again, it could be that this is part of the heter for bizayon, to prevent bizayon tefillin. Maser Rav Huna Brei Rav Ika hayababa derech tefillin barosha. We have a brayso that says that in this very exact case that Abai was describing, kiddush olav yom meiniach yado aleim ad shemagia lebayis hasamuch lechoma. He's out in the fields. We're not going to allow him to wear the tefillin all the way home. He lives in the center of town. We're going to require of him to find the first house on the outskirts of the city, and there he's going to take off the tefillin. So why does Abai allow you to go all the way home? According to the Brayso, we're only going to allow you to get to the first bias on the periphery of the city. Lo kash. Ha de mintera, ha de lo mintera. The Brayso is discussing a case where that bias hasamach lechoma is secure. Abai is discussing a case where there are no batim that are secure until he knows that when he gets home, then it's protected. So the Gemara asks, Elo mintera, if Abai is addressing a case where the houses around the city on the outskirts are not nishmaros, they're not protected, they're not secure for tefillin, then my ira barosho, why does Abaye tell me in his ruling that he was wearing his tefillin on his head, and he reminded himself, oh no, it's Shabbos, the sun is set. Abaye should have told me a bigger chiddush. Afilu machasan, machasan means meinichan, be munachim, machasan, they are sitting, bi'ara, on the ground, nami. Even in that case, he's allowed to put his tefillin on his head in order to walk all the way home, which is the first possible protection and security for the tefillin. Dasnan, we have a Mishnah in Eruvin, on Daf Tzadihei, Hamotze tefillin. If a person finds pairs of tefillin, and they're out there in the fields, and it's Shabbos, they're insecure, Machnisan zug zug, he puts on the tefillin, goes into the city and places them down in a secure place. Then he goes back and takes the next pair of tefillin and back and back. But we see clearly that from the Mishnah, we're allowed, for the sake of shmiras tefillin, to protect the tefillin, to even put the tefillin on. And Abai should have told me a bigger chiddush. Not only if he happens to be wearing the tefillin, we're going to allow him to go home with the tefillin, but even if the tefillin are sitting on the ground, he's allowed to put them on his head. Lokash. Gemara says that's not a valid objection to Abaye. Ha'demintra machmas ganve umachmas kalve. For ha'demintra machmas kalve velo mintra machmas ganove. Under what circumstances does the Mishnah allow you to put on the tefillin and then walk home? That's a situation in which there's not, just one second. Wait, just one second, sorry. Hamotzi tefillin is machnisan zug zug. So again, my area, barocha filu. I'm sorry, I just realized that I don't understand the Gemara properly. Give me a second. That what? On Abaye was, why did Abaye have to say that he's wearing the tefillin? L'chor, he's allowed to put on the tefillin. Lo kasha. What's the Gemara's answer now? That's when the Beitza says. Well, let me just work out the Gemara, and hopefully the pieces of the puzzle will fit into place. The case of the Beitza, where he's got to take off his tefillin when he reaches the first house outside on the outskirts of the city. The mintara, there is a certain level of protection, but not a complete protection, a partial protection in that house, because none of the Ganovim are going to break into that house. You know, he's got a lock on the door. Umachmas kalbe. And he's able to keep the dogs away. So therefore, since there is such a secure house that covers you for both Ganovim and Klovim, that's where he's going to have to stop, take off his tefillin. But Abaye, who allows him to go all the way into the city, that's a case of the mintara machmas kalbe, velo mintara machmas gnave. Which means that the outer house on the outskirts of the city can only afford a partial protection of the tefillin. And in that house, they keep away the dogs, but the Ganovim could break into that house. It's not secure for Ganovim. And since it's not secure for Ganovim, if Abai allows you and even requires of you to go all the way into your house where you'll have full protection, both from dogs and from thieves. And he says, I'm going to read the note here, Midubar, doing on the clock here, Midubar, Sha'af Besada, in the field where he finds the tefillin, in the field where he's wearing the tefillin, at the time that the sun set, they are protected from dogs, but not from ganovim. So Abaye is talking about a case where the tefillin are on his head. Oh, this is the piece of the puzzle I was missing. And since the tefillin are on his head, even though there is a partial protection against the dogs, we're going to allow him to bring the tefillin on his head all the way to his house in order to get protection from ganov. However, let's say he finds tefillin that are on the ground, and now he has to do two things. He's got to wear the tefillin, put them on, and then he has to carry the tefillin by wearing them. So that we're not going to be lenient and allow that unless there's no protection at all for the tefillin. That's the Beitza. But in our case of Abaye, with his partial protection, at least against klavim, if not against thieves, then Abaye will only allow you, if you're wearing the tefillin, to continue and walk and even all the way home in order to guarantee that there'll be protection against ganov. Now the Gemara wants to know, what's the chiddush of Abaye? I would have thought that even if the protection in the house on the outskirts of the city is only partial and it only protects against the dogs but not against the thieves, Rov listim Yisrael ninu velo mizalzle bahu. Even the Ganovim who are Jewish, the what was his name, Lansky. Anyway, even such a mafioso would be very careful about tefillin. That was the Havamina. Kamash Malan. Abai says, wait a minute, not all the Ganovim are Yisraelim. There may be some Goyim amongst the Ganovim too, Al Capone, and they will be mizalzel in the tefillin. Adran Olecha Beitza Shenolda B'Yontif. Now we start the perek that deals with Erev Tafshilin. So we're talking about a case where Yontif is on a Friday or on a Thursday, Friday in Chutz La'aretz, and he should not be cooking on Friday of Yontif for Shabbos unless he's designated an Erev Tafshilin. Yontif shechalios Erev Shabbos lo yevashel b'tchila miyontif l'Shabbos. We don't want him to begin the process of cooking and baking for Shabbos on Yontif. But he's required. No, I'm sorry. But he's allowed. On Yontif, he's allowed to cook for Yontif. How's that going to help him for Shabbos? Im hosir l'Shabbos. If he's lucky and there's some leftovers, then there'll be leftovers for Shabbos. However, the Mishnah wants to establish Erev Tavshilin. Don't rely on the fact that when you cook on Yontif, maybe there'll be some leftovers. You're not allowed to cook on Yontif for Shabbos. But Ose Tavshil mi Erev Yontif, if you begin cooking on Thursday, Erev Yontif, or Wednesday, then Somech Olav l'Shabbos. Once he began his cooking for Shabbos, on Erev Yontif, he's allowed to continue his cooking on Yontif for the sake of Shabbos. And we're going to see a machlokas in the Gemara why the Rabbanan made this takana of Erev Tafshil, two different schools of thought. In any event, now we have machlokas Beisil Beit Shammai. How much food do you have to prepare on Erev Yontif in order to qualify as an Erev Tafshil? Beit Shammai Omrim Shnei Tafshil. You need two separate cooked foods. Ubeisil Omrim Tafshil Echad. One is enough. Now, why is it that Beit Shammai required two tafshilim? There's a chiddush here of the Baal HaMa'or, Rabbi Mizrahi Alevi, and he says, Echad litzli v'echad litavshil. Right? It sounds like, according to Baal HaMa'or, he's going to be roasting on Yom Tov for Shabbos. He's going to be cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos. So you should set up one roasted food and another cooked food. However, the Ravid, in his Asagas on the Baal HaMa'or, says, no, that's not what Beit Shammai has in mind. He wants a Dover Nikar, something that's obvious for the sake of Shabbos, the holy Shabbos. So if he has two tafshilin, it's much more profound and dramatic. Whereas Beisil say one is enough, it's shovin, but even Beit Shammai would agree that bedug u Beitza she'olav, what they used to do is they used to soak a fish in May Beitzim, and then they would fry the fish. That's considered shehein shnei tafshilin. That's considered two tafshilin, even though it's one food, but it's made of two different minim, and that gives it the status of shnei tafshilin. By the way, this discussion might be relevant on Purim to Mishloach Manos, and on Leil Pesach to the Simon of shnei tafshilin. What constitutes shnei tafshilin? Now what happens? The Mishnah says, Acholam. My gosh, he ate the Erev Tafshil. By the way, it's quite common. And he ate it before he got a chance to prepare for Shabbos, so it's Yontif. And now he realizes, I already ate the Erev Tafshil. Oh, Shahavat. Well, what happens if the Erev Tafshil is completely lost? Also very common. Is Lo Yavashal Ola B'Tchila. Now he's not allowed to cook or bake on Yontif for the sake of Shabbos. But if he left over, or right, he ate part of the Erev Tafshil, but he left over a little part of it, is then somech olav l'shabbos. So Gemara later on is going to say that kolshu here means the kizayis. He left over at least one kizayis, so he lost most of his Erev Tafshil, but he still has a kizayis of a vestige of the Erev Tafshil. Gemara asked me, Nanimili, is there any basis in scripture for this takonas chachamim? This is what you call an asmachta, meaning when the Rabbanan institute something, they like to find a peg to hang their hat on, meaning some sort of source in the Torah. Omar Shmuel, the Omar Kra, the pasuk says, Zachar es Yom HaShabbos l'kadsho. You should remember the Shabbos to sanctify. Now, Shmuel is going to have a whole sophisticated drush here, but the simple shot in the pasuk is the mitzvah of kiddush. But he learns it the following: Zachreu, remember it, because you might forget it. Meaning, we're talking about a scenario where there's a very serious suspicion that he might forget about Shabbos and not prepare for Shabbos. And what's that? Zachreu me'acher shebolak chisho. Acher means from another day. There's a competition against the Shabbos from another day, which is going to pull him towards remembering that day and pull him away from remembering Shabbos. And what is that case? That's the case where Yontif is on Erev Shabbos. And Yontif is demanding, so to speak, that you bake and you cook for Yontif, and then he's going to forget about Shabbos. Rashi says, that if he, on Erev Yontif, cooks something specifically for Shabbos, then he's remembered the Shabbos. My time, now the Gemara wants to know, okay, you found the source in the Torah in a smachta, Shmuel, But what's the reason why the Rabbanan made this takana? They found an asmachta for the takana. And here we have a fundamental machlokes between Rava and Rav Ashi. Omar Rava says the reason why Chachamim were Masechet, that he set aside an Erev on Erev Yontif for the sake of Shabbos, is Kadeshi Yivrar Mana Yafel l'Shabbos Umana Yafel l'Yontif. On Erev Yontif, we'll call it Thursday, he is baking and cooking, or she is baking and cooking tons of stuff. But it's Thursday. Tonight, Thursday night, tomorrow, Friday, is Yontif. So a person bakes and cooks all this wonderful food, these delicacies, for the sake of Yontif. What happened to Kavod Shabbos? So the Rabbanan required him through this Erev Tavshilin to prepare two different foods. Choose a beautiful food and designate it for Shabbos, and another beautiful food designating for Yontif. And by doing so, Shabbos will receive its due. You won't get so caught up in preparing for Yontif that you'll forget about the Shabbos. So according to Rava, the purpose of Erev Tavshilin is Kavod Shabbos. And it'll be borer a Mana Yafa for Shabbos. It's almost as if, since Erev Shabbos is Yontif, Shabbos is crying out, don't forget me. It's like, very often you have a family and sometimes the youngest gets forgotten. Don't forget me. So Shabbos says, don't forget about me. I know you're so busy on Thursday, Erev Yontif, preparing for Yontif. Don't forget about me. And prepare a Mana Yafa for Shabbos. So we're being Doresh Kvod Shabbos, according to Rav. Rav Ashi has a whole different approach. It's all about protecting Yontif, not about Shabbos. Rav Ashi Omar Kadeshi Yomru in Ofen mi Yontif l'Shabbos. We're worried about a person who will cook on Yontif for Shabbos. We're not allowed to cook on Yontif for Shabbos, according to Rav Ashi. So therefore, if we tell him to already begin to prepare for Shabbos on Erev Yontif, he's not going to cook on Yontif for Shabbos. Again, he'll continue the cooking that he began on Erev Yontif for Shabbos, but he will not have a beginning, a haschala of bishul on Yontif for the sake of Shabbos, and kal v'chomer Yontif l'chol. Once the person gets the message, and he realizes that the reason why the Chachamim required of him an Erev Tavshilin is in order that he shouldn't be cooking on Yontif for Shabbos, but rather he should be continuing and completing his cooking from Erev Yontif for Shabbos, then certainly he'll get the message that you're not allowed to cook on Yontif for Chol, which is even a more severe reason. But the Gemara says, you know what? The Mishnah sounds awfully reflective of Rav Ashi. Not like Rava. Tnan. Oset Tavshil me Erev Yontif v'somech olav l'Shabbos. In other words, the time for preparing the Tavshil is on Erev Yontif, not on Yontif. Bishleim Rav Ashi, I understand this statement of the Mishnah that forces you and requires of you to begin cooking a Tavshil on Erev Yontif for Shabbos. According to Rav Ashi, the Omar Kadeshi Yomru ein Ofim Yontif l'Shabbos. Hainu, now I understand the Mishnah. To me Erev Yontif in, once you begin cooking for Shabbos on Erev Yontif, you will not cook on Yontif for Shabbos. Be Yontif lo, and how much more so he'll understand not to cook on Yontif for Chol. El Rava, the point of Rava, all we want to do is protect the Kavod Shabbos. My area may Erev Shabbos. I feel beyontif. Nami. Why do you have to force him to start cooking for Shabbos on Erev Yontif? Why not just force him to cook specifically for Shabbos on Yontif? And the impression you get from this Gemara is that Rava never accepted the prohibition of cooking on Yontif at Shabbos. The only issue here is, will he do so? How do we send him a clear-cut message? Buddy, it's Yontif, but don't forget about Shabbos. If that be the case, you can send him the message that on Yontif, set up an Eruv, meaning already designate food for Shabbos, and that should be enough. Gemara says, fundamentally, you're right. There's no need, according to Rava, to set up the Erev Tafshila on Erev Yontif. Set it up on Yontif itself, but El Gzeira Shema Yifsha. He gets so involved in preparing for Yontif on Yontif. If you know what I'm talking about, a woman who has guests coming on Yontif, she's so busy cooking on Yontif, she'll forget about cooking something for Shabbos. She's so orangutan, obsessed with Yontif, she'll forget about Shabbos. So therefore, says Rava, we require of you to begin your process of cooking on Erev Yontif. And then we'll guarantee a money yafa for Shabbos. Now, there's a long discussion here in the Mefarshim about what's called Ein Gozrin Gzeira L'Gzeira. And here it seems like Gzeira L'Gzeira. First of all, you're saying that she might get so involved in Yontif that she'll forget about Shabbos. And then you're going a step further and you're saying, well, now we have to require that she started on Erev Yontif. And anyway, it's Kula Chad Gzeira. Now we have an alternate source for what we call a smachta for Erev Tafshil. In the Parsha of Man, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the people of Israel on Erev Shabbos, Eis asher tofu efu, v'eis asher tevashelu, eis asher tevashlu bashelu. In other words, that which you intend to bake in an oven, you should bake today, meaning on Erev Shabbos. So bake for Erev Shabbos and bake for Shabbos. And the same thing with regard to cooking. Mikan, Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Now, to appreciate Rabbi Eliezer, we have to understand that the pasuk could have said Hayom, today on Erev Shabbos, Afu Ubashelu. There's a redundancy in Arichas Dvarim here in this pasuk. Eis asher tofu, efu, eis asher tevashelu, bashelu. What's it all about? And the answer is that we're talking about a certain Erev Shabbos, not a regular classic Friday, but rather a Friday that's Yontif, ein ofen ella al ha'afui. In other words, don't bake as the beginning of your baking, but bake as a tosefes of what you started yesterday on Thursday, or ein mevashim ella a tosefes al ha'mevushal on that which you cooked on Thursday. In other words, we're talking about a Yontif that falls on Erev Shabbos. And the Torah is telling you, Eis asher tofu, if you baked on Erev Shabbos, then afu, Eis asher tevashlu, if you already started bishul on Erev Yontif, then bashelu, mikan somchu chacham li Erev tafshilu min haTorah. That already on Erev Yontif, which means on a Thursday, you already started your baking process. So that the afiyah here is a tosefes ala ofui, and the bishul is a tosefes on the mevushal. You've started your afiyah and bishul a day earlier. And that's Erev Tafshil. On Rabbanon, this is a gadata. Ma'aseh Rabbi Eliezer, once we're talking about Rabbi Eliezer, Yoshev on Yontif, Doresh Kol Yom Kula v'Hilchos Shabbos. He was studying probably a profound limud of Hilchos Yontif on Yontif. And there were 7 different groups. Yotza Kasri Shon, almost at the beginning of his drasha, or the middle of his drasha, one group got up and they went to eat their Sudas Yontif. Rabbi Eliezer was not happy. Omar halolu bale pitosin. Pitosin are gigantic barrels of the best kind of beverages, maybe wine, maybe beer. And they probably prepared a gluttonous amount of drink, and therefore they're running to drink their drinks rather than staying and sweating it out to hear Divrei Torah. Kashnia, a little bit later, a second group packed out and went to eat their Suda Shabbos. Omar, Alolu Bali Chavios. They only have regular sized barrels of wine or drinks, and therefore they don't need so much time to drink what the limited amount that they have, so they stayed a little bit more to hear the Torah. Again, he's being very negative. Ashlishis, the third group, got up. Omar, Rabbi Lezer made a statement. Halalu bale kadin. They don't have much drink. They only have like little flasks of wine. Kad Revias Omar halalu bale laginin. They have very small utensils. I guess they were poor. And Kad Chamishis Omar halalu bale kosos. All they have is just cups to drink in. Hischilu kas shishis lotzes. Now the sixth group is packing out. Omar halalu bali me'era. They are cursed. It sounds like he was more makpid, Rabbi Lezer, on the last kat. Why? Because apparently there were so few Talmidim left in the Beis Medrash by this time that they should have felt a responsibility for Kavod Rav, to stick around. It's not like, Burzon, that three people show up for Daf Yomi. That's not a problem. But you're talking about Rabbi Eliezer, the great Rabbi Eliezer, and the Talmidim are running away. So in a sense, he indicated by implication a curse for the sixth kat. Nosan eno b'talmidim. Now he's looking at the last of the Mohicans, the seventh kat. Hischilu pnei mishtanim. The faces were turning red and white, and they were just aghast. Who knows what after all these terrible things that Rabbi Lezer said to the first six groups, what's he going to say to us? Hamalehem bonai. You don't understand. Lola chemani omer. You're not guilty. On the contrary, you deserve a prize. Halalu sheyotzu. Those who left, you stayed till the end of the drasha. Menichem chai olam v'yoski b'chai shah. They don't care about chai olam, about eternal life, and learning Torah. You acquire eternity. They're only interested in chai shah. They won't eat a good suda. Just that some had less for the suda, some had more. And when the last group who had that chiba from Rabbi Eliezer were ready to go and go home and eat whatever suda they had, Omer Lahem, Rabbi Eliezer said to them, quoting Ezra Sofer, who spoke to the people of Israel on Rosh Hashanah in Sefer Nehemiah Perek Ches, Lechu echlu mashmanim, jesumam sakim, shilchu manos liein nochon lo, ki kadosh hayom ladonenu, v'al teotzvu, ki chedvas Hashem hima uzcha. The Gemara is going to dash in every part of this pasuk, but basically he was giving them a great bracha. Kol hakavod, as we say here in Israel, that you remained until the end of the drasha. Now go home and enjoy the yontif. Omar Mar, meinichem chai olam v'oskim b'chai shah. When you leave a Beis Medrash and a shir in order to eat a sudas yontif, that's called chai shah. Hasimchas yontif mitzvah. The Torah commands us to the mitzvah of simchas yontif. I wouldn't call that chai shah. Rabbi Lezer Tamei, the Omer, his opinion was Rabbi Lezer simchas yontif rishus, meaning you have a choice. Either you eat and drink and be merry, or you study Torah. If you eat, drink, and be merry, sure, it's a sudas mitzvah v'samachta b'chagecha, but you forfeited a greater mitzvah of Talmud Torah. This Sanya, we learned in the Beitza, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, ein lo li adam b'yontif. On Yontif, a person has two choices. He can go in two ways. Two roads diverge in the yellow wood. He dedicates himself primarily to eating and drinking. And he could diminish his achila and his suda because he is dedicating himself to Torah. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Chalkeu Chetzia Hashem v'Chetzia Lachem. And we'll see exactly how each one came to his opinion. Rabbi Yochanan, Shneim Mikra Echad Darshan. They were both trying to reconcile an apparent contradiction in two psukim. Omer, with regard to the last day of Pesach, in Dvarim Perek Tezayin, it says, Vayom HaShvi Atzeres L'Hashem Elokecha. And it says, L'Hashem Elokecha. Dedicate yourself to spirituality. Kosev Echad, which Shmini Atzeres in Parshas Pinchas, it says, V'yom HaShmini Atzeres Tieh Lochem. Lochem means enjoy the yontif. Okay, so how do you reconcile these? Rabbi Eliezer Sovar, what the Psukim are telling you is that have your choice. You can either go this way, Lashem, or that way, Lachem. O Kul Hashem, O Kul Lachem. For Rabbi Yeshua Sovar, Rabbi Yeshua was of the opinion, Chalkeu, Chetzil Hashem, Chetzil Lachem. Both are obligatory. Split up your time between the Suda and the learning of Torah and the Tefillos. Ma'ili ein nachon lo. What is the meaning of the pasuk lein nachon lo in the Nehemiah Shulchan Machos lein nachon lo? In other words, lein nachon lo. It doesn't say lein lo, but lein nachon lo, and it implies that someone who has the wherewithal of tzarchei yontif, but he didn't prepare it. Ein nachen. Nachen is miloshen achana. He didn't prepare it. The pasuk is indicated that he didn't set up an erev tafshilin, and therefore he doesn't have the ability to cook on Shabbos, and therefore the pasuk says shilchu manos, have rachmanis on him. He doesn't have an erev tafshilin. Send him some food for Shabbos. Ika diamri lemisha lo haya lo laniach erev tafshilin. He didn't even have the possibility of setting up an erev tafshilin. Maybe he was so preoccupied in erev yontif. Rashi gives an example. He's looking for a very expensive lost object. He didn't have a time to set up an erev tafshilin, and therefore we send him our gifts. But aval bishaylo laniach erev tafshilin v'lo niach, he couldn't care less about erev tafshilin. Is poshea who we don't have a mitzvah of sending him a suda on Shabbos. What does the pasuk mean? Ki chedvas Hashem hi me'uzchem, Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Lem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael banai levu alai v'kadshu kedushas hayom. In other words, prepare a sudas yontif and use your money to sanctify the day and to prepare for Simchas Yontif, V'aminu bi, and even though you're going to be spending a good deal of money for Yontif, as we all know, and I always think of Matzah Shmura for Pesach, the prices have gone sky high, but Vani Porea, God says, Levu alai, you could borrow and I'll pay you back. And this is where we're going to stop and take this opportunity to wish you all a Gmar Chasima Tova, and our tefillos for Yom Kippurim should be accepted on high for ourselves and our families and all of Klal Yisrael.